At the height of the Second World War, Isaac Fadoyebo, a 16-year-old from rural Nigeria, got enlisted in the British Army. Well, he was one of some 100,000 Africans sent halfway around the world to fight the Japanese in Burma. Writer and reporter BARNABY PHILLIPS delivers this gripping story of a Burma boy in his book, Another Man's War. BARNABY PHILLIPS is here with us in the studio to discuss the story of friendship and courage. Good to have you on the news at this time.
It's very nice to be here.
Now, the book tells of a true story of a Nigerian soldier who fought for the British Army in Burma during the Second World War. Tell us a little more about this book.
It's a book of a film. I mean, normally one does things the other way around. You see films of books. I made a documentary for Al Jazeera in 2011 called The Burma Boy, about Isaac Fadoyebo's extraordinary story, how he traveled to the jungles of Burma, a young man from rural, what is today Ondo State, found himself fighting the Japanese very quickly in a very dangerous situation. His unit was ambushed, the British officers were killed, he was horribly injured, and he lay in the jungle for many months, unable even to crawl with a smashed leg and a stomach wound. And he owed his life to some kind villagers who brought him food, who hid him from the Japanese, who would have executed him if they'd found him. And some 9 months later, he came back to Nigeria in 1945, and he lived the rest of his life out in a very respectable way. And he wrote a brief booklet about his own story, which I came across in London a few years ago. I had lived in Nigeria some years ago, which is why I was interested in the story. And I was so moved by Isaac's book that I tracked him down, and to my delight discovered that he was still alive, living in Surulere, in good health, in his mid-80s. And we made a fantastic film about him, and we traveled to Burma and found the family that had saved him 67 years ago. And what was very moving was to discover that he had treasured the memory of them for 7 decades, and in fact they had been thinking of him. So I found the film such an enjoyable experience that I felt, okay, this is my chance. There is a book there is so much more to tell. So now the book has come out.
Now, what makes this an invaluable contribution to literature in Africa is the meticulous way you told the story of Isaac Fadoyebo. So tell us your challenges. I'm talking about the literary challenges, the logistical challenges when it comes to writing this book now.
Well, I've spent 25 years as a reporter, doing the day's news, and often you have to get ready by lunchtime, and it's very quick and immediate, and that's exciting, but it's also superficial. I wanted to do something much longer. In my job as a reporter with Al Jazeera English, I travel around Europe and indeed the world a lot, so I needed to take a break from that. I took 6 months off, 6 months leave, and I sat in the British Library, and I turned off my mobile phone, I turned off the Wi-Fi, I didn't look at Facebook or Twitter, and I just focused on the historical documents, listened again and again to the interviews that Isaac had given me. Isaac tragically passed away 2 years ago, or almost exactly 2 years ago, in November 2012. So he had seen the film go out, and I believe he was very pleased with the film. I'm glad to say. I wish he could still be here to see the book. I say tragically passed away. He died a happy man at the ripe old age.
87, yes.
Just exactly, 87, with a loving family. So he emerged from his horrific experience in the war and led a long and successful life.
All right, the book also explores how, Britain forgot its debt to Africans. How did you feel about it?
Well, I felt this was an important story to tell to a British audience, because in Britain, we talk about the Second World War a lot. I'm speaking as a British person now. We talk about the Second World War a lot, and it is often seen as Britain's finest hour. We stood alone against fascism in Europe. We stood for freedom. We fought bravely. Now, all of that is true, and I would say it is a good thing that Britain fought against Hitler and defeated Hitler. But it is only part of the truth. There is a bigger truth of the Second World War that is not told so much in Britain. And that is how Britain did what it could to preserve its empire, but particularly in Asia against the rising force of Japan. And in order to defeat the Japanese, we, the British, used whoever we could. And in this particular instance, we used 100,000 Africans who we took across the world and involved in a struggle that was not theirs. And many of them died, many of them had bad experiences. Thankfully, the majority came back, but it's an important story to tell, I felt.
But how do you feel about it, sir, personally, when you heard about the story? How did you feel?
Well, you know, I've lived a lot of my life in Africa. I grew up in Kenya. So when I discovered Isaac's story, I thought, yes, now I have what I want, because I have a strong human story, a narrative thread through which I can tell the wider historical story, and this will educate, but in an entertaining way, the British public. However, let me also say that I very much hope this book will be widely read in Africa. And I would also go so far as to say that if we, the British, have neglected this part of history, so too have African countries for different reasons, because you have to remember that a country like Nigeria, the Gold Coast, which became Ghana, Sierra Leone, Gambia, Kenya, all these former colonies achieved independence after the Second World War with a speed that no one had anticipated. In fact, many people had not even anticipated it at all. And their contribution was irrelevant at best, potentially even embarrassing for new countries that were struggling to forge new identities. And then you only have to look at the demographics of a country like Nigeria. People are so young. For many people in Nigeria, the Biafran War is ancient history, let alone the Second World War.
Now, aside Isaac Fadoyebo, there are many other tales of unsung African heroes. So what do you want the world to, what is most significant that you want the world to grasp about your book?
I would like historians and journalists in Africa to take up this book and find other similar stories, because you can bring a different and maybe a deeper perspective than I can. I mean, my perspective is quite British. I'm very sympathetic to Isaac. He was my dear friend. I'm very fond of Nigeria, but unfortunately I don't speak Yoruba or Igbo or Hausa, some of the indigenous languages. I had to rely on translation to go through some of the documents. There may be cultural things that I don't know, that you know, or that other Nigerian journalists or academics would know. And I would urge them to find other Isaac Fadoyebos out there, because those stories are out there, of that I'm sure.
You know what is most fascinating is the fact that you took out time to actually meet Isaac Fadoyebo and the Muslim family who saved him. So what is most memorable, if you can remember way back now, what is most memorable from the meeting?
Well, there were two. The first moment I met Isaac Fadoyebo, I was very happy, because I'd found his document in a library in London. I thought it was incredible, and I thought I did not dare to believe my luck that this gentleman was still alive, because it had been written some 20 years earlier.
Okay.
And when I tracked him down to Surulere and went to see him and realized not only what a charming and delightful and eloquent man he was, but also that he was in good health and that he remembered his story very vividly, I thought, you know, this is gold dust, journalistically speaking. Then I went to Burma to try and find the family. Now, it's a long story, but I had many reasons to be worried about finding that family, because they are part of an oppressed Muslim minority who live in what is today Rakhine State, the Rohingya people they're called today. And they have had a very difficult time. Many have been displaced. They live in camps in Bangladesh. And I had rather vague instructions from Isaac as to how to find this village, to be honest. He would say things like, oh, Phillips, if you're coming from India, it's on the right-hand side of the river. Well, I could deduce from a map that he meant the west side of the river, but of the River Caladan. This is where the Africans fought. But I needed more precise information like that. But when I actually found them and realized that this story was as emotional to them as it was to Isaac, that was one of the most satisfying moments of my life, not just my journalist career.
All right, Mr. Barnaby Phillips, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts with us. And of course, your new book, Another Man's War. Really appreciate your time with us on TVC News at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now to other stories from around the world.